McGraw-Hill Ascent Audio presents The Business of Race, How to Create and Sustain an Anti-Racist Workplace, and Why It's Actually Good for Business, by Margaret H. Greenberg and Gina Greenlee. Foreword by Tom Rath. Narrated by Machelle Williams. Publisher's Note: in this audio edition, you will hear references to illustrations, figures, graphs, and tables present in the print and ebook formats of this book. Foreword. A benefit of being in my line of work is that hundreds of authors, new and established, send me pre-publication copies of their books to review. Those who know me well send drafts early on in the process, as they know I am a tough and candid critic. The more I read, the more repetition I see. So when I see something novel, it commands my attention. When I read an early draft of The Business of Race, it grabbed my attention as one of those rare books that is both new and practical. The book is also timely and important. The ideas and activities in these pages are what the business world needs now. Race is an emotionally charged and polarizing topic. For decades, we've been told not to talk about race, especially at work. Every year, I meet with leaders, managers, and employees who want to have these conversations, but they don't know how. The Business of Race is truly a remarkable and practical guide for employees, managers, and senior leaders alike. Co-authored by two women, one white, one black, Margaret Greenberg and Gina Greenlee model what they describe in the book through their own collaboration. Through interviews with dozens of leaders, they describe the often messy but necessary work businesses must undertake if they are going to remain competitive. The authors are not traditional diversity experts, and that is precisely why their ideas are fresh. With deep backgrounds in business, coaching, and OD, organizational development, they get us to explore what's needed at the individual, team, and organizational levels to reimagine a workplace that mirrors the customers we serve. I first read a draft of The Business of Race while on a family vacation. I found myself rereading several passages because Greenberg and Greenlee kept making me stop and think. Really think. In the introduction, the authors suggest this book be read one chapter or part at a time, and then put down to reflect on what you learned. I couldn't do it, as I was drawn into the stories and driven to share what I was learning. And I can't wait to share this book with business leaders I know. This is a topic we all need to address now. It is a conversation we all need to have today. In the pages that follow, you will begin your own inner journey. Through that discovery, you'll learn how to engage with colleagues, customers, team members, and your organization to make substantive changes in your workplace. Your friends and family will benefit from your discovery, too. Tom Rath, speaker, researcher, and #1 New York Times bestselling author of StrengthsFinder 2.0, How Full Is Your Bucket?, Eat, Move, Sleep, and most recently, Life's Great Question. Introduction. Claiming a lane. Setting expectations. The workplace. Race. Applying a strategic business lens on the latter to reimagine the former. That's the lane we're in. Why focus on the workplace? Simply, that's what we know. We are organizational development professionals, coaches, and educators with a combined business experience of 50-plus years with Fortune 5, 50, 100, and 500 companies in roles as both external consultants and internal employees. Beyond the workplace, numerous complex, intersecting facets of structural racism are rampant across our institutions: health, education, law, childcare, housing, banking and finance, law enforcement, and the penal system. We respect and support the work being undertaken to dismantle racism in these domains. However, that is not the focus of The Business of Race. Our lane is the workplace. The Business of Race uses a business lens not a social justice lens, to address the emotionally charged, polarizing, and deeply complex dynamic of race. Further narrowing the width of our lane is particular attention to the interactions between and among Blacks, African Americans, and whites. Why? Gina self-identifies as both Black and African American. Margaret self-identifies as white. Neither of us is in a position to examine the dynamics of dominant and non-dominant groups in, say, Hong Kong, Honduras, Trinidad, Brazil, Ghana, or Croatia, which include wide-ranging cultures and ethnicities within racial identities. That would be committing an injustice to people in those communities and around the globe. We can, however, speak to our own experience and share additional insight through the interviews we conducted with business professionals in Western nations. Who is the Business of Race written for? Is this a book for white people? A frequent question we received from friends, colleagues, and complete strangers upon hearing the title, The Business of Race. Our reply, an emphatic no. We wrote this book for the human race, and specifically for people working in the business world. If you are a business leader, individual contributor, human resources or DEI professional, educator, coach, or consultant, then we wrote this book for you. What are race work and race talk? Throughout this book, we write with caution the word diversity. That broad term is often wielded to avoid specific discussion of race and racism in the workplace. We are staunch supporters of all aspects of diversity, including gender, religion, sexual orientation, veterans, and individuals with disabilities, in every sector of society, including the workplace. However, those affected groups are beyond the scope of this book. Instead, we use the terms race work and race talk. Race work includes the inner work of raising our awareness and building new ways of thinking and being in the world. The term also includes the outer work that organizations perform to develop, implement, and measure policies and practices to create and sustain an anti-racist workplace. There's a difference between being a non-racist and an anti-racist workplace. A non-racist workplace is one in which a company does not consciously discriminate against people of color. But neither does it acknowledge racism's metastatic toxicity, so no actions are taken to address racial inequities in how the company operates. An anti-racist workplace first acknowledges that racism exists, and then forges a connection between that history and the toll it exacts on individuals, the organization, and society at large. In response to that understanding, leaders in anti-racist companies actively engage the entire organization in a strategic imperative to create and sustain business practices and policies that advance racial diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI. Race talk is a subset of race work. Conversations that encompass topics of race, racism, racial identity, and racial equity are what we mean by race talk. It is filled with intense emotions that reveal major differences in worldviews, which can at times feel threatening. Unless prompted, many employees in the workplace would prefer to avoid such discussions, minimize their importance, or dilute their meaning by talking about diversity in general terms. As a society, we tend to react and mobilize only in response to a perceived, isolated incident captured on cell phone video that goes viral. For example, a violent attack or murder of an Asian American Pacific Islander, AAPI, or an unarmed Black man. These incidents, however, are but symptoms of intentionally enacted, centuries-long inequities. Systemic change will only come when we connect individual acts of racial violence and economic oppression to their daily expression in every societal institution, including the workplace. Our process. We are not diversity, equity, and inclusion experts, So we had to educate ourselves first. We read, researched, we took a course, read some more, took another course. We conducted a survey of more than 50 racially diverse professionals to learn their burning questions and struggles about race and racism in the workplace. We also conducted interviews with more than 24 business professionals to explore their stories. They represent myriad industries, including financial services, construction, advertising, healthcare, high-tech, real estate, and manufacturing and distribution. Their fields include education, diversity, human resources, law, marketing, organizational development, psychology, and research. The professionals we interviewed work for, lead, or own micro, small, medium-sized, and large multinational businesses. Also, they represent different organizational levels. Their roles range from individual contributors, supervisors, and middle managers to C-suite executives and board members. Their business experience spans careers of 7 years to long-standing tenures of up to 4 decades. Britain, Cuba, India, Korea, Mexico, and the United States are their countries of origin. These business professionals also have wide-ranging racial identities. We include their race when we share their stories, so you can get a feel for how their lived experiences shape their perspectives. You will also notice that we capitalize both black and white when referencing racial identities. Capitalizing these words in this context is a recent phenomenon in the writing world, and whether or not to do it continues to be hotly debated. Not here. Simply stated, we've engaged our own race work and this writing through an asset lens. To lowercase one racial identity and not the other runs counter to that view. A few professionals we surveyed and interviewed preferred that we only include their racial identity, not their name or company name. We wanted their voices heard, so we included their perspectives while still honoring their request for anonymity. Not every company or business professional we approached granted us an interview. People have much on their plates. Perhaps, too, it is symptomatic of the avoidance in discussing the undiscussables, race and racism. As much as we learned from our coursework, reading, and research, we learned even more from the people we interviewed. Also, the following 11 companies were featured prominently in The Business of Race, Amazon Web Services, CFRA Research, CVS Health, EverFi, Living Cities, Mass Mutual, McCormick & Company, Prudential, Shawmut Design and Construction, Truss and Walton Isaacson. We've woven their stories throughout The Business of Race, with no vested interest in any of these companies other than wanting to share their approaches to race work. Not as formulas, but to inspire your own race work. Our hope is that you can learn from them like we did, and that their journeys will spark your own. Finally, we share asset-based models, research, and tools to help you better appreciate how the individual journey buttresses race work in the business cases we cite. We'll also remind you of the business toolkits you use nearly every day to manage projects, people, and systems, and show you how to apply them to your race work. Many of these tools will feel familiar and accessible to you, but don't confuse accessibility with ease. This is hard work. Don't expect to reimagine 400 years of racially imbalanced norms in one financial quarter. Our journey. The Business of Race would never have been written were it not for George Floyd, a man we would never know personally, but whose public loss of life spawned a global movement. His murder by a white police officer and captured on cell phone video not only sparked protests around the world, but also a phone call. Margaret called her friend Gina and said, "I've been thinking about you and wanted to hear your voice. What is going on in the world?" And that's where Margaret left the space for Gina to share her feelings. In our 20-plus year friendship, we rarely talked about race, until now. Gina grew up in a white neighborhood and had mostly white friends during her childhood. Today she lives in a predominantly white town and works around mostly white people. "You're one of only 2 white people of the many in my circle who reached out to me," said Gina. She shared how isolated she felt. She shared her anger, frustration, and sadness. That fateful call between 2 friends prompted a series of LinkedIn articles. Not alone, together. We felt compelled to act. We would use our friendship and love of writing to bring voice to what nobody wanted to talk about: race and racism. Our hopes. 50 years from now, social psychologists, cultural anthropologists, epidemiologists, and historians will still be studying the year 2020. As the pandemic ravaged the globe, many businesses were ahead of governments by mandating work-from-home policies to protect employees. Worldwide, kitchen tables, basements, and bedrooms became the new workplace and the new classroom. Social distancing became a new norm to help flatten the curve of the COVID-19 infection spread rate. The year 2020 was also when the murders and attacks against Black and Asian people in the United States and around the world galvanized people of all races to protest against systemic racism. Our hope is that the business of race instills in you the courage to talk about race and racism. Moreover, to do something constructive about it. No matter your level in the organization, no matter your racial identity. We don't pretend to know what that something is for you. It may be reshaping your thinking, conversations, and decision-making. It also may be evolving your business strategy, policies, and practices. Our hope is that the business of race will inspire you to use your voice, to create and sustain an anti-racist workplace. Now let's get down to the business of race. Gina and Margaret, August 2021. Using the business of race as a workbook. We've taken the complex and emotionally charged topics of race and racism and distilled them into digestible chunks for the busy professional. While you might be tempted to read the business of race in one sitting, we suggest you read one chapter or part at a time. This approach will allow opportunities for reflection. We help you do this by ending each chapter with a handful of questions. You might want to use the business of race as a personal journal or workbook, a place to jot down your thoughts so you can recall them later or discuss with others in the workplace, book club, or classroom. Let's begin now. Take a moment and reflect on why you are listening to this book right now. Maybe it's because you ethically believe addressing systemic racism is the right thing to do, but you don't know where to begin. Maybe your company has made a public #BLM, Black Lives Matter statement, but now what? Perhaps you're getting pressure from your board, boss, employees, or spouse to use your positional influence to create meaningful change. Or you want to avoid another discrimination lawsuit. Possibly you're frustrated with all the talk and media attention on race and racism, with little to show in substantive difference. Regardless of why you picked this book, you are about to embark on a journey that will be both exciting and daunting, one that is fraught with missteps and filled with surprising giant steps, a journey that is both self-reflective and other-focused. First, you should establish the reason why you picked the business of race. It will serve as a convenient guidepost. Part 1. The Business Case. It's time for a new approach. Talking about race and racism at work historically has been taboo. However, we can't solve what we don't talk about. For nearly 60 years, workplaces have focused on diversity specific to gender and many historically underrepresented groups. Attention to racial diversity has been less tenacious. The events of 2020, emblematic of racial inequities rooted in a long history of systemic discrimination, forced that to change. While we believe that no single societal sector can disrupt the status quo on its own, we also believe that innovative businesses can lead the way. In Chapter 1, we outline 6 reasons why the workplace is the perfect place to discuss race and racism, and by extension, undertake race work. Some organizations will actively persist in creating an anti-racist workplace, firm in the belief that it is morally right. Others need evidence that their business survival depends on it. In Chapter 2, we lay out the business case for why embarking on or advancing your racial diversity strategy actually makes good business sense, no matter the size of your company or the industry you represent. Chapter 1. You can't solve what you don't discuss. Why the workplace is the perfect place to talk about race and racism. I ask people, how are you defining diversity? When I tell them we are specifically talking about race and Black people in particular, I get pushback. They say, we don't just talk about one group. My reply to that is we have to, because we haven't been talking about it all these years, and look what's happened. People are still so afraid to talk about race. Ernisha Pinder, Black American Director of Strategic Diversity Management at CVS Health. It's hard enough to talk about race and racism at the family dinner table or neighborhood barbecue. What makes us think we can talk about it at work and make any progress? For decades, we've been told not to talk about race at work. 30 years ago, the late Harvard Business School professor emeritus Chris Argyris wrote about discussing the undiscussables in his book, Overcoming Organizational Defenses. Of the many undiscussables, race and racism are chief among them. The term diversity often takes center stage in company press releases, interview soundbites, annual reports, and training programs. It's all-encompassing and includes race, religion, gender, LGBTQ+, disabled persons, other historically underrepresented groups, and thinking preferences. In business, though, you cannot advance a strategy you do not name. To create and sustain an anti-racist workplace, we must normalize the conversation on race and racism. Here are 6 compelling reasons why. Number 1, where we interact. Work often the first and perhaps only place in our daily lives where we regularly engage with someone from a different race, culture, religion, or neighborhood. We, the authors of this book, never would have crossed paths had we not connected through work. Margaret and her husband chose to raise their 2 daughters in a rural Connecticut town, different from the Connecticut cities where they both grew up. Gina, whose chosen lifestyle is partner-free and child-free, relished a 5-minute work commute. So she chose to live in Hartford, the capital city, where Margaret, a business owner of a consulting firm, saw many of her clients. A workplace in Connecticut's capital city first brought Gina and Margaret together. Personal choice on where we live may be one reason the workplace is often the only place where we interact directly with someone of a different race, ethnicity, or culture different from our own. Here is another reason. In 2002, Neely Pitts of Richmond, Virginia, was house hunting for her son when she spotted a for sale sign in front of a modest brick bungalow. She stopped to ask the owner about it. He said, "This house is going to be sold to whites only. It's not for colored." 3 years later, in 2005, Rufus Matthews, the homeowner, testified before the Virginia Fair Housing Board that he believed a clause in his deed prohibited him from selling to a Black buyer. Specifically, a 1944 deed on his property restricted owners from selling to any person not of the Caucasian race. Restrictive covenants are binding agreements that hold homeowners to behaviors and practices in renting or selling their house. Racial restrictive covenants prohibit the homeowner from selling or renting to anyone of a specific race or ethnic background. The wording may differ, but the crux of the issue is the same. Racial restrictive covenants were designed to create and maintain neighborhood segregation. Figure 1.1 shows a page from the 1921 deed of the Los Angeles home that Rochelle Newman Carrasco and her husband purchased in 1990. The racially restrictive language of the deed reads, No portion of said premises shall ever be leased, rented, sold, or conveyed to any Negro, or any person of African descent, or of the Mongolian race, or of any race other than the white or Caucasian race. That as to the grantor of said premises, its successors, and assigns, a breach of any of the foregoing conditions or restrictions shall cause said premises to revert to the said grantor, its successors, and assigns, each of whom, respectively, shall have the right, in the event of any such breach, to immediately or at any time during the continuation of any such breach, re-enter or take possession of said premises, and to remove all persons therefrom. Racial restrictive covenants were deemed illegal many decades ago. The Supreme Court ruled against them in 1948. 20 years later, the Federal Fair Housing Act of 1968 outlawed them. However, historians who track such data say that thousands of racist deed restrictions, as well as restrictive covenants governing homeowner associations, survive in communities across the United States. Every city, large or small, that I am aware of, where anybody has looked for racial covenants, they have found them, said historian Kirsten Delegard. She is the founder of the Minneapolis-based Mapping Prejudice Project, which researches the covenants that barred non-whites from buying property in the city's most desirable neighborhoods. Consequently, many rural, suburban, and urban neighborhoods across the United States remain segregated. This minimizes our opportunities to meet people of different ethnicities or races until we enter the workplace. Number 2. A ready-made coalition. At workday's end, we go home to our respective neighborhoods, some of which may be de facto segregated. By contrast, the workplace is an organic form of coalition, the center of shared meaning. This place is where unique individuals from wide-ranging lived experiences come together to advance common goals. They produce products and services for the marketplace or implement new systems and processes. This organic community exists whether we work remotely, in an office, on a factory floor, or in a retail establishment. That sense of we among employees is essential to creating and sustaining an anti-racist workplace. In 1995, the game of rugby became the we that united black and white South Africans. Nelson Mandela's election to the presidency in 1994 divided the nation. Not everyone was happy with the new majority-rule government, or that Native Africans would hold the same civil rights as minority whites. What could bring South African blacks and whites together? Rugby had long been viewed as a symbol of white supremacy in South Africa. During apartheid, the whites-only national team, the Springboks, proudly wore the antelope emblem on their green and gold jerseys. Black South Africans identified the national team as synonymous with minority rule. When South Africa found itself in the unusual position of welcoming the world after years of apartheid enforcing sporting isolation from international rugby, there were widespread fears of a racial bloodbath. Some black groups were keen to avenge years of racial oppression. Some whites were plotting violent protests against the new black majority rule. Mandela embraced the South African national team during its 1995 Rugby World Cup run, and he asked reluctant black citizens to join him. When the Springboks won the international championship, all South Africans cheered the victory for the team and for their nation. The Nelson Mandela rugby story is well known, giving South Africa's visibility on the world stage as a once openly apartheid nation, and also because Mandela was incarcerated for 27 years on a deserted island. 4 years after his release, he became president. Not so well known is how Israelis united around cottage cheese. Serbian political activist Srđa Popović tells the story of Itzik Arlov, an Orthodox Jewish insurance salesman in Israel who makes ends meet by moonlighting as a singer in local synagogues. A thoughtful and passionate man, Arlov didn't like piggish capitalism, but he understood that for anything to change, he needed to make the fight relevant to everyone, including individuals who were relatively well off. He knew that most people wouldn't join an effort to do something that sounded really daunting, like forcing the prime minister to resign or outlining an alternative economic.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?